So welcome back again. More or less everybody looks satisfied. Alfonso is taking seat also. So we start with the last block for the day, and we switch again to another part of Europe, to Switzerland. And Patrick Scherler is going to present us the red kite population in Switzerland. Patrick, please.
Yes. So welcome also from my side. I chose the bit generic title, Population Dynamics of Swiss Red Kites. I chose this as an excuse to show you a few very new results from our red kite project at the Swiss Ornithological Institute. So as many of you may be familiar with, the red kite distribution in Switzerland increased over the last decades quite rapidly. So they moved in from the northern areas of Switzerland, where they were still present in the 70s, and basically recolonized all of the central plateau and moved into the alpine valleys. This led us to start a project at the Swiss Ornithological Institute, where we wanted to find out what the mechanisms are behind this population expansion. And it turned out to become one of the larger projects of our institute in the meantime. And we want to look at different things. So first, if you want to understand the population increase, you basically need to quantify the 4 demographic rates. First of all, you need to know something about reproduction, how many offsprings are produced every year. Then also about mortality, and that's also a big overlap with the Eurokite project. How many of them die again, and when, and where, and what of. And then individuals can also dissipate from the population into other populations or come in from the outside, which is rather unlikely in our case, as we have basically no sightings or recoveries of ringed or marked individuals in Switzerland that came from abroad. But these 2 rates are basically can be summarized as the dispersal movements of the individuals. And today I would like to highlight picked out a few results from our project that are linked to those demographic rates. And we still don't have the full picture on how they play together and which ones are how important, but yeah, I would just like to show you a few exciting results. Of course, it is important how the environmental variables affect those 4 parameters. And I would like to start with the reproduction. So we started in 2015 with a huge monitoring in Western Switzerland of an area of about 400 square kilometers, where we have about 130 to now 180 red kite pairs. So pretty large density. And we basically observed the nests, we ringed all the chicks, we had cameras installed at most of the nests. So we gathered a lot of data on the reproduction and could hence quantify the reproductive success in detail. As I mentioned, we have a very high breeding density. We saw this morning the breeding density of one of the very good areas of Germany. That's probably not even half of what we have. So it's really one of the highest ones currently known. There used to be a lot higher ones, as we also heard this morning from the Hakel area, for example, but these are exceptions. So yeah, we looked at which birds bred successfully and which ones just attempted to breed or failed along the way. And what we saw is that basically half of our red kites, they don't even manage to breed successfully. So they fail along the way. Only half of them actually produce fledglings. And when we look at the numbers, the reproductive numbers are fairly low to moderate compared to other populations. So it seems not to be a very productive population we're looking at here. But together with the huge breeding density, that still produces a huge number of offsprings per area. And to show that a bit in more detail, so here you have an example of one of Thomas Pfeiffer's and Bernd Mayburg's birds. This is, by the way, taken from this book. If anyone's interested, I have a few copies here. Just approach me. So this is an example of Thuringia, and you see in orange, all the GPS locations of a male during breeding season. Dark blue spot is the nest location, and the light blue polygon is the minimum convex polygon. 95% of the GPS points are inside. And when we compare that on scale, same map scale to our area, the same type of data, a male during breeding season, same amount of GPS points, same MCP polygon, you see the difference. It's quite striking. Also in the landscape composition. So we have a mosaic of landscape, whereas, for example, here in Eastern Germany, we have larger fields, and this small mosaic allows for a lot more territory. So this is the actual map of our territories in our study area. And just that you can imagine how it looks like. It looks fairly different to here, but yeah, it's a small mosaic, and what's also striking is that you have a lot of these fields here. So there are just basically grass fields cut for daily consumption by the cows. And this allows, of course, to always have accessible food. Even though the landscape is also intensively used, there's always something that's accessible, even if it's not much, and that's apparently enough to sustain quite a high density. We also want to look at another aspect. So our red kites in Switzerland, they turn out to be less and less migratory. So they tend to stay in Switzerland or many of them at least. And we've seen that this is age dependent. So the older the red kites get, the more often they stay in Switzerland. And we wondered, has this an effect on their reproductive output? So what Stephanie Witzak did in her PhD, she looked whether the migratory red kites have a higher fledging success than the resident ones, or vice versa, and how the elevation plays a role on where they breed, because we have quite the elevation gradient in our study area. And what she found is that, yes, there is a difference, and it's mostly the residents that have an advantage at low elevations. And this is striking because when you look at our study area, you see here the advantage plotted against disadvantage, basically. So the purple areas are the areas where the migrants have an advantage, and the green area where the residents have one. And this varies a bit by year, but you see here mostly the residents have an advantage. So it pays off to stay in Switzerland in winter. And when you put that in the national context, you see the distribution of red kites in Switzerland, and most of the population lives beneath the 800-meter mark. So this applies actually to most of the red kites. And it's only in very strong winters or severe winters where the migratory strategy actually pays off. So to summarize this a bit, I've seen that the migration strategy actually has an effect on the reproductive success, and that elevation plays an important role there, and that this small mosaic landscape actually kind of delivers a constant food accessibility that's apparently enough to sustain quite a large population of red kites in a small area. And this high density allows them, even though they have a very moderate breeding success, to have a high offspring density after all. I would like to continue with a small glimpse into some dispersal results. So we not only looked at the nest and the breeding behavior of the birds, but we also tagged a few red kites, more than 560 in total, most of them juveniles. And we collected those life histories of the kites to make beautiful maps, like Rainer does. And yeah, those trajectories help us to understand better their migratory behavior, but also their dispersal behavior. And so what is this natal dispersal or dispersal behavior in general? So dispersal is a three-stage process. So first, the juveniles, they leave their parental home range. So that's the departure. And until they decide to settle somewhere, to breed somewhere, they spend a fair amount of time just wandering around, interrupted, of course, by migration events and overwintering periods. But during breeding season, they just wander around potential breeding areas and explore those. And at one point, they decide to settle somewhere. And we were wondering, what kind of habitats do they look at when they wander around? And do they differ from the places where they actually settle? And so we just published a paper in Ecography last week about this topic, where Florian Orcheret made some habitat suitability models for both phases. And we see that for the prospecting phase, there's a lot more suitable habitats around. So they're way broader in what they explore than where they actually settle, which you see on this side. And you see that they mostly also, for settlements, avoid higher areas. They try to settle in lower areas. But where do they do that, in fact? So, in looking at the dispersal distances of our kites, we're still continuously collecting information on settlements, of course, but you see that most of them actually end up settling close to where they were born. So within a couple of kilometers, maybe up to 10 kilometers from where they were born. So they don't go very far, with a few exceptions. And to our disadvantage, they also do that quite late in their life. So they tend to wait until the 4th or 5th calendar year. Some of them already in the 3rd calendar year. But it takes a long time until they settle, some even after age 7 or 8. So we've seen that red kites, they're more selective in their settlement decisions than during their prospecting. And we see that they generally avoid these high elevations, even though they can eventually fly into the mountains if they want to. And they're fairly philopatric, so they tend to settle close to where they were born. And we're further looking into that and whether it's actual philopatry or just some kind of habitat imprinting from the natal area that leads to this decision, but that's further investigations that will follow. And now just a short glimpse into mortality results. So we're still at the beginning here, but Stephanie looked at the migration effects on survival. So in her PhD, and I would like to show you that because it's quite interesting. You see here the example for a male survival curve. It's a cumulative survival. And you see that, does this work? Oh, yeah. So you see in the x-axis always first calendar year breeding season, non-breeding season, second calendar year breeding season, and so on. So it's a multi-state model that she made. And she plotted the transition ages, so that the age when the birds decided to become residents and to stop migrating, because the other way around rarely happens. Mostly they just decide at one point to stay resident, and they'll do that for the rest of their life. And what is striking here is mostly this. So you see that generally this yellow and green curve is quite low. So the ones that already decide to become resident early in their life have a bit of lower survival. This is even more pronounced in females. And additionally, you see this drop in the purple curve. So the ones that keep on being migrants throughout their lifetime, they have a small drop in survival, which doesn't seem significant here. But when you project this over the years, up to age 8, which is kind of a realistic age for a breeding red kite, this results in a survival difference of up to 10%, 15%, which is quite considerable. So there is a selective pressure likely against being migratory in the breeding population. But we'll try to put this into context with an integrated population model soon. Another little teaser, so this is not published yet, but Benedetta is about to submit her PhD, and I want to show you because it's a very nice graph. So she looked at sociality measures, so how social young red kites are during their dispersal. So once they leave the natal home range, how social they are, how often they meet conspecifics. And this apparently carries over, this kind of personality carries over to the dispersal patterns, but apparently also to results in differential mortality patterns. And what she's seen here is that, this EDEI is the measure for sociality. So the more social ones tend to die more of traffic collisions, railways or street road collisions. And this is quite interesting to me because this means that likely also their foraging pattern has an effect on how they die. And the more social ones tend to die more often of collisions than not. So she also looked at what the mechanism behind it could be, and she looked at how close they are to road on average, and plot this against the sociality again. And she saw that, of course, there are differences between countries. So in densely populated Switzerland, where you have roads everywhere, they're obviously a lot closer to roads in general than in France or Spain. But this general pattern of the more social ones being also closer to roads kind of explains that. So they just spend more time there, likely due to social information that they gather in the foraging process. So, and there are other conspecifics. The more social ones tend to join them and then also get run over, unfortunately. To summarize it, we've seen that it's not only context dependent on how and where you die, but also personality dependent. So we will have to consider that in further modeling. And yeah, as you might imagine, what we'll hear more about later on from Rainer, there's still a lot to be investigated. And yeah, fortunately, we have a huge data set to do that. So why did the population in Switzerland increase? Well, it's not so easy to say why exactly, because there are many reasons for it, and it's still a puzzle of multiple factors that's responsible. So one is certainly the very high offspring density that is produced, which helps to sustain this population, even though they have a fairly low reproductive success. This restricted dispersal helps to keep birds in Switzerland, that they come back, they settle where they were born, and they just wait, even in this dense population, to find a spot somewhere to settle in between. And we have kind of differential survival rates and reproduction in residents. So this change in migration behavior towards becoming a resident might pay off and help the population to increase in the long term. As I said in the beginning, we still don't know the relative contributions of all those factors, but yeah, we're working on it. I would like to thank the myriad of field workers involved in this project since 2015. Also, of course, this is National Science Foundation for funding this project, at least partly. And last but not least, I would like to thank these guys, because it's a very generous species to work with. Yeah, willing to carry loggers all around Europe. And thank you all.
Many thanks, Patrick. Very interesting and just-in-time presentation. Thanks a lot. So we have enough time for questions if there are any.
Yeah, I'm Bettina Wilkening. I work for a developer for new energies. And I'm also an ornithologist and behaviorist. And therefore, my question is about the different aspects of social behavior and the collisions you showed us. There were fewer collisions. There were more collisions the more social the animals behaved. But there were fewer collisions with electrocution I saw on your graph. And I'm asking why that could happen, because that's interesting.
To be honest, I don't know exactly why. I mean, it might even just be kind of an artifact of the type of modeling we did, so that the distribution of the mortality causes has to sum up to 100 basically in this type of model. But I can't think of a plausible reason why there should be significantly less less electrocutions in less social birds. And I have to be honest, I don't remember the model output in vivid detail, so I have to ask Benedetta whether there was a significant effect of lower electrocution rates in less social birds. Can't answer you that on the spot, but I gladly do so by email if you like.
Thanks a lot. There was a question over there, please.
Hi, Nils Breitbach again from WPD. Bettina, I think you were thinking about the collision with wind turbines, but I think in Switzerland it's usually traffic, right?
So there were different, well, maybe I can go back in the, which slide is still on? I mean, it was just, she just distinguished between, so it's about this graph here. So she just distinguished between electrocutions, collisions, anthropogenic causes, and natural causes here. The question was pointing towards this, the huge part of low social individuals that died of electrocution. But as I said, I know that the effect is certainly significant of the collisions, more collisions of more social individuals, but I would have to check if there's enough differentiation between the others and low social ones. Yeah.
Could you tell us once again, how do you define being social? I did not understand that.
Exactly. So I threw out a lot of slides there because it's a fairly complex story. And I would recommend that you attend the Benedetta's PhD defense in December, but I can roughly tell you how this works. So what she did is she looked at the movement behavior after departure, so after leaving the natal home range until they migrated for the first time. And she looked how many, basically she did social network analysis where she looks at how many meetings they have, so how many times they get close to each other, these individuals. And she also did the whole chapter on how this is affected by whether it's a first hatched or last hatched individual, whether it's from a good quality habitat or low quality habitat. And there are huge differences, but basically it's social network analysis. That's the short answer.
Thanks for that. We maybe can use that also for humans.
That was my question too.
Okay, so it was the same question. Thanks for the answer. It counts twice. Any other questions? No. Okay, then Rainer.
Patrick, what are your future plans in the next year? So is there something what you can tell us about? What are the next papers that you're working on, or what is the main aim for the next, in 5 minutes? No, only in 3 minutes. The most important things.
One of the most important ones you probably know about. So we're going to look at kind of the annual and life cycle differences in mortality patterns across Europe. So basically using your data as well, or all of your data. So this is certainly an important one that we'll work on quite a lot in the coming month. Then we have still unpublished results from all the 3 PhDs in our project. We have 2 postdocs working mostly on dispersal questions, and there the direction is currently our focus lies on the interaction between migration movements and dispersal movements, because it plays a role where you start dispersing. So it's important on where you stop migrating, basically. And we're looking on how this interaction between migration and dispersal movements also affects reproduction in the end. And Stephanie will next work on an integrated population model, kind of trying to combine all the results from her thesis and from previous theses into an IPM. Yeah. Apart from genomic analysis that we also started doing, many aspects.
Thanks for these ideas concerning the speeches in the next conference. And we are perfectly in time. And thanks again to Patrick.